Hello there, I'm Toby Haydock, and what if thieves walk among the gods? Welcome to Too Much Information, which aims to tell you the who, what and when of Doctor Who, a television programme about the benefits of being clever and the drawbacks of being too clever by half. Whether you're discovering the episodes for the very first time, or you know your Keith Pyatts from your Stephen Wyatts, then you're extremely welcome on this odyssey behind the scenes, which aims to go through the series one episode at a time. In this edition, one of the regulars is missing from the studio, and so is part of the set. One of these was planned, but one of them very much wasn't. So join me, Toby Haydock, as I give you the who, what and when of Doctor Who, The Warriors of Death, or Ixta's Feeling the Pinch. First broadcast on the 30th of May 1964 at 5:16 p.m. It starred William Hartnell as Doctor Who, William Russell as Ian Chesterton, Jacqueline Hill as Barbara Wright, and Carol Ann Ford as Susan Foreman. It was written by John Lucarotti, produced by Verity Lambert, and directed by John Crockett. It was watched by 7.4 million people, and the audience appreciation was 62. Following Barbara's failed attempt to stop a human sacrifice, Susan has been taken to a seminary to learn the ways of the Aztec people. Tlatoxel is certain that Barbara is a charlatan and challenges her to offer proof of her divinity. But Ortlock is not yet persuaded of Barbara's deception, and he is disturbed when he foresees the end of his entire civilization. Meanwhile, the Doctor has struck up a friendship with the wise woman Kameka, who offers to introduce him to the son of the man who built the tomb in which the TARDIS is trapped. However, this man turns out to be Ixta, who is to face Ian in combat to determine which of them will lead the Aztec armies. Ixta tricks the Doctor into supplying him with a poison which will drain Ian's strength, ensuring his victory and Ian's death. The when. 18th of March 1964. The same day that John Lucarotti finishes writing The Aztecs, David Whittaker has a discussion with John Gorrie, the director of the preceding story, The Keys of Marinus. The topic is Carol Ann Ford, who will need to be released from one day of rehearsals for Gorrie's penultimate episode, Sentence of Death, in order to pre-film some material for The Aztecs. This is because Ford will be on holiday during the recording of both the second and third instalments of The Aztecs, The Warriors of Death and The Bride of Sacrifice. But Lucarotti has structured his scripts to retain a small presence for Susan throughout. Fortunately, Gorrie has no objection to this plan. 13th of April 1964. Susan's scene for The Warriors of Death is filmed at Ealing. Also present are Keith Pyatt as Ortlock and Walter Randall as Tornila. Designer Barry Newbury dresses the seminary set with pottery which hired art students have adorned with Aztec-style paintwork. 13th of April 1964. After a prolonged period during which Doctor Who design information has been late in reaching the designers, the production office finally gets caught up this week. Sort of. The pertinent details for the studio recording of The Warriors of Death are provided to Barry Newbury on schedule, but they are incomplete, with more information reaching his desk 6 days later. 29th of April 1964. Doctor Who's studio facilities at Lime Grove have been a perennial thorn in the production team's side since the programme began recording in the autumn of 1963. Good news on this front finally arrives when Alan Brimble, the assistant programme manager for Studio Resources, confirms that The Warriors of Death will be taped not in Lime Grove Studio D, but rather in the more modern and spacious confines of Television Centre Studio No. 3. 4th of May 1964. 4 days of rehearsals for the Warriors of Death take place at the Uxbridge Road Drill Hall. Carol Ann Ford has now departed on vacation, following the recording of The Temple of Evil on the 1st of May. 6th of May 1964. The BBC's head of serials, Donald Wilson, sends a memo concerning Doctor Who to another figure who looms large in its genesis, Sydney Newman, the head of drama. He's responding to concerns which Kenneth Adam, the director of television, or D-Tel in internal BBC jargon, raised with Stuart Hood, the controller of programmes for television, on the 28th of April. Adam has voiced the opinion that creepiness in Doctor Who is too heavy-handed, and that the regular characters seem implausibly thick. The writing, he believes, needs a touch of discipline if Doctor Who is to survive. In addition to Wilson and Newman, Adam's memo has also been shared with Doctor Who producer Verity Lambert. Wilson now writes, "I myself have been concerned about Detail's points, particularly his last one, and some 3 weeks ago I urged on Verity the necessity for making sure A, that our leading characters don't appear to be simply stupid, and B, that the thrill should be genuine and lead directly out of a strong situation and not be added for kicks. When I last spoke about this serial to you, if you remember, I made the point that the kind of writers with the necessary invention are not always necessarily the best in terms of characterization and dialogue, but we must keep trying." 2 days later, Newman himself writes to Stuart Hood, promising that Kenneth Adams' criticisms have been brought to the attention of the Doctor Who production team. He pithily summarises Donald Wilson's comments as, "The scripts are always what is difficult," thereby coining every Doctor Who showrunner's motto for the next 6 decades and counting. 8th of May 1964. Doctor Who enjoys the luxuries of Television Centre for the first time, as the Warriors of Death goes before the TC3 cameras. The studio day begins at 8:30 a.m, with the scenery and lighting teams getting things ready for a camera rehearsal at 10:30 a.m. Lunch follows at 1 p.m, after which more camera rehearsals get underway at 2 p.m. Apart from a half-hour break at 4 p.m. for tea and publicity photographs, the work is continuous up to the 7 p.m. dinner. The technical lineup takes place at 8 p.m, before recording runs from 8:30 to 9:45 p.m. However, the day does not proceed without incident. Designer Barry Newbury has discovered that the design elements for the Garden of Peace have not been retained, against his instructions. Fortunately, the set for Susan's ceremony cell still exists, despite having only been required for the pre-filming. Working quickly, Newbury cannibalises it and brings in some plants from Greenery Hire of Hampton to create a previously unseen part of the temple garden, just in time for recording. At some point after this, Sydney Newman has a private viewing of the recording of this episode in order to make his observations, which he scribbles down and sends to the production office. His verdict, rendered in bullet points: "Jackie is weak, frail, no glamour. Fluff, who?" I mean, Sydney, if you're going to note down every time Hartnell fluffs a line, you're not going to have time for much else, mate. "Thumb press and knives, watch it. Why the power of the butcher needs explaining. Music not loud enough or tense enough. I don't admire Jackie, she's weak. Rotten music. Needed close-up of Who to entrance." Oh well, Sydney, nobody's perfect. 30th of May 1964. Although it's scheduled for broadcast at 5:15 p.m, The Warriors of Death starts a minute late. It's watched by an audience that's virtually unchanged from last week at 7.4 million, and it enjoys a similar reception, earning the same appreciation score of 62. Only its chart position suffers slightly, sliding down 9 places to 34th. 1st of June 1964. Various local evening telegraphs, Peterborough and Northampton for example, run the same response to Warriors of Death, declaring that, when it comes to television, children come off best at weekends. The article, credited to T. McGee, singles out Doctor Who as being much more fun than anything else to be seen throughout the whole of the evening, with the exception, perhaps, of the Morecambe and Wise show. It goes on to note that we still have to see anything to compare with those fascinating robots, the Daleks, with their built-in killer rays, but at the moment the Aztecs and their sacrificial rites are providing a fair amount of action and suspense. 2nd of June, 1964. Various papers report the shock news that Stuart Hood, the BBC's controller of programmes for television, whom we've just mentioned in connection with Kenneth Adams' memo of the 28th of April, is to leave the corporation for the commercial channel Associated Rediffusion. In what may seem slightly baffling to 21st century fans, Hood is frequently described in terms similar to, as the Daily Express puts it, the man behind such hits as Z-Cars, Compact, Dr. Finlay's Casebook, and yes, Doctor Who, which helps to demonstrate that, although decades of chronicling the making of Doctor Who have cemented certain individuals as being crucial to the show's origins, the reality is much more complex and involves critical contributions from many people who've been relegated to the backwaters of Doctor Who lore. Too much information, and it has to be said, we're not alone in these efforts, will do its best to redress those omissions. 6th of June. The Daily Worker is hopeful. Getting its dislike of Terry Nation's 5th episode of The Keys of Marinus off its chest, it describes Sentence of Death as the lowest point reached by the serial yet. That is the serial of Doctor Who, not The Keys of Marinus, but the whole show, one long serial, or indeed, adventure in space and time. It is hopeful that John Lucarotti will deliver. Nation, it thinks, was too rushed upon his return, but praises Lucarotti for his painstaking attempts for historical accuracy and much tighter plot, which gives the reviewer, Bob Leeson, hope for the future. The What? For the opening moments of The Warriors of Death, John Crockett has opted to re-record the last few seconds of The Temple of Evil. This new version is only superficially similar to the original. John Ringham delivers all of Tretoxel's lines directly to camera one, but, a week earlier, No, this is not your taxa, had been addressed to the Doctor and Barbara, and This is a false goddess, to the assembled Aztecs. Only, And I shall destroy her, which has now become I will destroy her, was directed to the audience. Tretoxel is now standing at a different angle on the set for the sacrificial area, with the temple wall visible behind him. And the lighting of the scene is much brighter, since Howard King's team is no longer attempting to evoke a rainstorm. As a result, the flash of lightning, which had originally punctuated Tretoxel's words by illuminating the right side of his face, is now absent. At the start of the next scene, John Lucarotti intends for Barbara to be looking at the bracelet on her wrist, but John Crockett instead has camera 4 pull back from a shot of the bracelet as Barbara is lost in thought. In the script, Barbara turns to face the Doctor much sooner, after he tells her that you knew better, rather than waiting for the allusion to Susan's situation. As written, the Doctor explains that when the sacrificial victim was offered to the gods, it made him one as well. Hartnell instead says that it made him feel one, which has slightly different connotations. On the page, he also goes on to tell Barbara, and you tried to deny him the honour. William Hartnell cuts off the end of Jacqueline Hill's next line.
I just didn't think about it in those terms.
When Barbara breaks down in tears, stage directions give her a more extreme reaction, covering her face with her hands. As the Doctor apologises for his outburst, there's a subtle difference between his dialogue as scripted and William Hartnell's on-screen delivery. I shouldn't have been so harsh with you, is what John Lucarotti writes, but I didn't mean to be so harsh with you, is the recorded version. This nuance helps to reinforce the growing friendship between the Doctor and Barbara. More than just regretting his venomous tone, the Doctor has had no intention of adopting it in the first place. William Hartnell fumbles his last line before Tretoxel enters the antechamber, where the script has, as long as you're here, we're reasonably safe. Hartnell instead delivers the rather clumsier, we're quite safe here as long as you're here. When Barbara responds to Tretoxel that a man shall know his gods by the signs of their divinity, a stage direction suggests that she indicates the bracelet. There are indeed 13 heavens, not to mention 9 hells, in Aztec mythology. Said to have been formed from the head of the primordial crocodile Cipactli, They are each home to one or more deities and are characterized by specific traits. Like Barbara, I'll choose not to list them off here, both in the interests of time and in the interests of not spraining my tongue on those labyrinthine Aztec names. While too much information would never dream of disparaging Ian Cullen's skill at spear throwing, we're pretty sure that he doesn't actually launch the missile that's seen quivering in its target at the start of the next scene. For reasons of safety, if nothing else, one spear would have been set into position, hidden by the fact that camera 2 is initially positioned on the obverse side of the target, while Cullen quickly divests himself of the other spear following the cut to camera 1. This is also our first opportunity to enjoy the shot-making rendered possible by John Crockett's decision to mount camera 2 on a mole crane, as opposed to a traditional pedestal mount. It's one of the ways Doctor Who benefits from the move to Television Centre, since this kind of equipment wasn't available at Lime Grove. In case it isn't clear from the on-screen action, stage directions make it explicit that Ixta's target is a post which wears a garment and headdress. Ixta's throw is said to demonstrate devastating accuracy. Ian's response to Ortlock's question about his approach is a little longer in the script. On screen he says that, "I should use more cunning," but as written, this is, "a little more cunningly. I'd use stealth." William Russell slightly flubs his line after Ian threatens to subdue Ixta only with his thumb. He's meant to say, "I won't kill you, Ixta. Not this time," but instead he muddles the two sentences, landing on, "I won't kill you this time. Not this time, Ixta." Having paralysed Ixta in the script, Ian reassures Ortlock that Ixta will wake up in a moment, rather than the more vague, "He'll be all right," of the transmitted version. As Ian leaves, William Russell ad-libs the little pat he gives the stunned Ixta. Next, we meet the perfect victim for the first time. As Alan Barnes explains in his The Fact of Fiction article for Doctor Who magazine, quoting the 1843 work History of the Conquest of Mexico by William H. Prescott, the perfect victim has his roots in an authentic Aztec practice. The young men who filled his role were chosen for their attractive features, because they were meant to resemble the handsome god Tezcatlipoca. They were put into the care of tutors, a function fulfilled here by Tonila, and treated as if they were a living god, enjoying a life of ease and luxury prior to their eventual sacrifice, which I must admit all sounds pretty good to me, well, except for the last part. The term perfect victim does not come from the Aztec culture. Instead, John Lucarotti is alluding to the original meaning of the word victim, which, in its 15th century manifestation, meant a living creature killed and offered as a sacrifice to a god or other power, per the Oxford English Dictionary. In particular, the notion of a perfect or ultimate victim appears in Christianity in reference to Jesus. Having been introduced to Ixta by Tlatoxel, the perfect victim has an extra line of dialogue in the script in which he queries why Tlatoxel says that Ixta would be commander of the Aztec armies. After speaking of the victim's perfection, the rest of Tlatoxel's speech is much longer in the script. "When the time is ripe and you face the gods," he says, "all failings will have dropped away. How else could you meet those gods and tell them of the Aztecs?" Similarly, John Lucarotti gives Tlatoxel more to say after he offers to arrange a duel between Ian and Ixta at sunset. "Of course, two men fight better when one challenges the other. There is less vigour in a contest made for entertainment." This is what's meant to prompt Tonila's line about Ixta laying the challenge. In the Temple Garden, the Doctor's description of himself as a scientist, an engineer, a builder of things seems to have been prompted by a memo that BBC head of drama Sydney Newman sent to Doctor Who producer Verity Lambert on the 10th of April. In it, he suggested that the programme should glamorise the title, occupation, etc. of an engineer. As Alan Barnes observes in Doctor Who magazine, Newman appears to have been reacting to a speech given in February by scientist Sir Harold Hartley, who voiced concerns about the impact that a perceived deficit of scientists and engineers would have on the British economy. Newman goes on to say that, "Nowadays, for a kid to want to become a scientist is really hot stuff, But to become a technologist or an engineer, which the country needs in millions, is without prestige. Engineers, of course, are people who repair cars, aeroplane engines, run atomic energy plants, etc. Another way of putting it is an emphasis on the applications of science, rather than on pure science by itself. He concludes, "If you can help do this, I think it will do the country a lot of good." Alan Barnes also observes that this scene marks the first time that the Doctor introduces himself by that title, although at this stage he equivocates slightly by saying that "they call me the Doctor." It's worth noting, though, that this is a deviation from the script, where he more straightforwardly says that "I'm called the Doctor." When Kameka leaves, the scene ends on a shot of the Doctor looking after her with an expression of undisguised admiration. This isn't John Lucarotti's idea, however. His description of the Doctor suggests that he just examines the bushes. There's no such thing as shots 19, 20 or 21 in The Warriors of Death, and unlike Macra, this is demonstrably true. The episode up to this point has comprised shots 1 to 18. Everything to come consists of shots 22 to 59, plus the telecine insert of Susan in the seminary, which doesn't get a shot number because it's been pre-recorded. So what's happened to shots 19, 20 and 21? The camera script explicitly states that there are no shots 19 to 21. In fact, this is noted twice in both a master list at the start of the script and again at the end of the scene between the Doctor and Kameka in the garden. At some stage in John Crockett's planning process, shots 19 to 21 almost certainly did exist, although sadly we have no way of knowing if they were a separate scene, now lost, or an extension of the sequences on either side. It's also impossible to say why they were dropped. The Warriors of Death isn't especially lengthy. Its broadcast duration is only 24 minutes and 11 seconds, well within the standard 25-minute Doctor Who time slot, so the most obvious motive of an overrunning programme can probably be discarded. On the other hand, timing an episode is an imperfect science at best, so it's not impossible to think that a cautious Crockett may have sacrificed shots 19 to 21 to ward off the wrath of the gods of BBC scheduling. After all, not even Barbara Wright could hope to rewrite that sort of history. Then again, maybe this was a consequence of the issue with the garden set that we discussed in The When, with Crockett forced to limit his shots on the hastily assembled replacement set. Regardless of the motive, with shots 19 to 21 gone, it would have been logistically easier just to jump straight from shot 18 to shot 22 rather than renumber everything afterwards. Camera 2's mole crane is again put to good effect at the start of the next temple scene, providing Tlatoxel with a dynamic entrance. To accommodate the shot, John Crockett arranges the temple guards in rows in front of Barbara, whereas the script has them grouped about her. Captain stands in front. In the camera script, the sequence of Ixta meeting Kameka is meant to end on a pan down to Ixta's hands. On screen, however, instead he buries his weapon in the target. Carol Ann Ford's involvement with the Warriors of Death is limited to the 75-second telecine insert that follows. Here, Susan's rejection of arranged marriage reprises a theme previously explored by John Lucarotti in Marco Polo. The camera's focus on Susan at the end of the scene deprives the viewer of clearly seeing the scripted reactions of Ortlock, a little discomforted, and Tonila, who looks surprised. In stage directions for the start of the next scene, Ixta's jaguar headpiece is rather bizarrely described as his pussy mask. Camera 3 pans up a little too quickly for us to see what makes the Doctor flinch at Ixta's sudden arrival. The script explains that he scratches the back of his hand on the margay cactus he had been examining. We're then told that he puts the back of his hand to his mouth, although William Hartnell settles for rubbing the irritated skin. The margay is a real plant, native to Mexico and Texas, also called the agave americana, the American aloe, or, because it flowers only once in a lifespan running 1 to 3 decades, the century plant. The Aztecs put the maguey to various applications. Its fibres were used to make things like nets, ropes and sacks. It was fermented to produce an alcoholic beverage called pulque, and it did have medicinal applications, albeit as a laxative rather than a sedative. So, in real life, the Doctor's interference would have seen Ian running towards the nearest bushes rather than sliding unconscious to the floor. That being said, the maguey doesn't have the typical kind of cactus thorn seen on screen, although it does have sharp spines on the ends of its leaves. So, in spite of that name being used in the script, perhaps this is actually a different plant altogether. The involvement in this scene of the extras playing the Aztec elders is an addition made during the preparation of the camera script. Presumably, with the artists already hired to appear in the earlier sequence involving the Doctor and Kameka, John Crockett decided to get his money's worth by inserting them into this scene as well. When Ixter offers to bring the drawing of the tomb entrance to the Doctor, "If the gods are willing," William Hartnell's response is, "I don't see why not, But this slightly misses the sense of the scripted line, "Well, why shouldn't they be?" which segues into Ixter's explanation about his forthcoming combat. On screen, there's no explicit inspiration for the Doctor's plan to help Ixter by using the sap of the maguey cactus. That's not the case in the script, where John Lucarotti has the Doctor inspired when he looks at the scratch on the back of his hand, referring back to the start of the scene. This seems to have been dropped during rehearsals, perhaps because of the difficulty in communicating the proposed action to the viewer. When we switch to Ian practicing with the club, stage directions tell us that he has obviously been at it for some time, which is why Tlotoxl wonders if he is fatigued. The scene of Barbara and Ortlock at the temple gives us another example of John Crockett using Camera 2's mole crane to add more energy to a scene. As written, Barbara stands at the archway. She looks out at the sacrificial altar. Ortlock stands behind her at a respectful distance. But instead of this static configuration, Crockett starts the action with both characters emerging from within. However, this dynamism isn't without its peril, and it's hard to miss the shadow of a boom mic moving to catch Barbara and Ortlock's dialogue as the camera pans left to pick up their entrance. Crockett identified the need for 2 microphones for this scene. Mic B1 was positioned towards the back of the set for the opening exchange, and mic C3 was designated to pick things up once they came through the doorway. The camera notes that C3 might be a fish, meaning a microphone on a long apparatus, like a fishing rod. As Barbara leaves Ortlock, a stage direction prompts him to bow to her. This doesn't happen on screen, implying the extent to which Barbara's words have unnerved the High Priest of Knowledge. The last shot of Barbara also deviates from the camera script, in which she is looking out towards the sacrificial area and shudders. Instead, she directs her gaze in precisely the opposite direction, as if she can't bear to look at the place where she's just predicted that so many will die. When the Doctor goes to see Barbara after providing Ixter with the cactus thorn, Jacqueline Hill swaps around a couple of her lines.
"No one's allowed to see me,"
is meant to be her original admonition, while later she explains that
"During my questioning, none of you are allowed in here."
She delivers them in the opposite order on recording. After the Doctor reveals that he'll soon know how to get back into Yetaxa's tomb, Barbara's reaction is different. In the script, she says,
"I won't be sorry."
But Jacqueline Hill opts for a more concise,
"Good."
The business of Barbara deducing Ixter's identity from the Doctor's description of his face mask is business worked out in rehearsal. The script simply has the Doctor referring to Ixter by name, but John Lucarotti seems to have forgotten that he had earlier established that Ixter wanted to remain anonymous in his interactions with the aged servant of Yetaxa. Much of the Doctor and Tlotoxl's dialogue during the Doctor's arrest, including Tlotoxl ordering that he be sent to the barracks and the Doctor demanding to be released, is not found in the script. The very end of this scene is also different. John Lucarotti suggests that it should end as Barbara paces nervously, allowing Ortlock's departure, but John Crockett instead has camera 2 dramatically push in on Yetaxa's bracelet. This also marks the only recording break in The Warriors of Death, which provides an opportunity to reposition the cameras for the fight between Ian and Ixter. Speaking of which, the script has Tonila and the Perfect Victim enter separately from Ian, Ixter and their retinues, but the televised version has them arrive with Ian. During the duel, one piece of scripted business that very nearly escapes the cameras comes after Ixter has scratched Ian with the thorn. Warriors push Ian at Ixter again, writes John Lucarotti, and indeed, when we cut from a shot of the Doctor and Sir Toxel back to the fight, the arm motion of one of the guards nudging Ian can just be spotted. The Who. Keith Pyatt. The first guest actor we see in The Aztecs is Keith Pyatt, playing High Priest Ortlock. Born Keith Malcolm Rule Pyatt in Blackheath in 1902, by 1925 he was stage managing at the Aldwych Theatre in London. Later that year, he was treading the boards for a season in Rep in Birmingham. Another stage managing stint in the capital followed, this time for illustrious actor-director Robert Atkins. Laurence Olivier was playing a servant. Then, 1926 found him at the Royal Court, giving his Norwegian captain in Hamlet, with John Gielgud as Marcellus. Pyatt's television credits stretch back farther than most. As early as 1938, he was playing Satan in Michael Barry's production of The Marvellous History of St. Bernard. His theatre career included a good number of London engagements. In 1927, he took over from Raymond Huntley to play the title role in Count Dracula, in a production that Pyatt was with when it reached its 250th performance at the Prince of Wales Theatre at the West End. He also appeared in Orson Welles' London stage debut in 1951, when Welles was directing and starring in Othello, with Pyatt playing Desdemona's angry father, Brabantio. His film career was decent, usually in modest roles. He sometimes went uncredited, but could often be found playing officials, magistrates, butlers, and the French. His credits included The House of the Arrow, 1953, The Colditz Story, 1955, Village of the Damned, 1960, and The Phantom of the Opera, 1962. And he was reunited with Orson Welles in 1965 for Welles's film The Chimes of Midnight, an adaptation of the Henry IV plays from Shakespeare, in which Pyatt appeared as the Lord Chief Justice. The same year, he could also be seen in Basil Dearden's Masquerade. But it was on television that Pyatt really hit his stride. His CV included all you would expect it to, with stints in most of the important science fiction series that were produced during his lifetime. The Invisible Man, 1959, Out of This World, 1962, The Avengers, 1963-1966, R3, 1965, Out of the Unknown, 1966, and The Prisoner, 1967. Before all of these, in 1953, he was cast as Detective Inspector Lomax, one of the lead characters in the Quatermass Experiment. Ultimately, however, Pyatt proved unavailable for the 5 episodes in which the character appeared and was replaced by Ian Collin. Instead, Pyatt just contributed to the final, episode 6 of the serial, playing the minister who comes to oversee the climactic events at Westminster Abbey. In 1952, the year before the Quatermass Experiment, Pyatt had received an inheritance, including a London house, from a woman to whom he was not related. The reasons for this are long and murky and go back to family connections from several years prior. But this respected, busy and hard-working actor had, up until this point, been of somewhat modest means, but this change in his fortunes transformed his life. Having made his last stage appearance in February 1968 in The Case of Father Brendan at the Phoenix Theatre, Pyatt was still working right up until his death on April 6, 1968, making him one of the very first contributors to Doctor Who to pass away. 1 film, an uncredited turn as Max in The Devil Rides Out, and 2 television engagements as Commander Shotcroft in the Bells of Hell episode of Late Night Horror, and as Haterius in the 2nd episode of The Caesars, only made it to screen posthumously. He was married to the actress Sheila Rayner, and they had 2 children. Ian Cullen. Ian Cullen, who plays Ixter in The Aztecs, was born George Ian Cullen in the mining town of West Bolden, County Durham, and was the youngest of 2 sons of wine merchant John Cullen and nurse Elizabeth. John returned from World War II a changed, damaged man who rarely spoke, whilst Elizabeth was an amateur actress who wrote her own plays and pantomimes, but the mores of the time and place would never permit her to turn professional. Ian, however, was allowed to attend acting classes at the age of 4, and, frankly, it was easier for him to appear in productions with Elizabeth than to have to worry about babysitters and the like, so his stage blooding as an amateur was born of necessity as much as anything. Aged 6, he determined to become a professional, and at 8, he vowed to get into the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, the only drama school he had heard of. Ambitions he fulfilled, as it turns out, although before that he had to do his time with the more straightforward education offered by Washington Grammar School. He made his professional debut in 1952, playing Tiny Tim in a stage version of A Christmas Carol, and then his father, overhearing some actors in the off-licence he owned discussing their need for a talented youngster, suggested him for the title role in The Winslow Boy opposite Frank Finlay as Sir Robert Morton. The young Finlay, who had not then been to drama school, was also determined to do well in the business, and so he took Cullen back to his hotel for extra rehearsals between the two of them, from which the young Ian learned a lot about his craft, and indeed about hard work and application. He then became the go-to youngster for the casting of child parts in various theatres in the northeast, appearing in some plays like Jim Fish and The Barretts of Wimpole Street, which required an important juvenile contribution, several times in numerous productions on diverse stages. Emboldened by these successes, and now very experienced, Ian won a scholarship to RADA at the age of 16, graduating in 1958. He then began building up an extensive CV in repertory theatre all over the country and joined the Royal Shakespeare Company in 1960. 2 years with them found him appearing in many productions including Macbeth, King Lear with Paul Schofield, Beckett and The Devils. His 8 West End appearances included The Mousetrap as Sergeant Trotter, the Ambassadors Theatre in 1968, and Run for Your Wife at the Criterion Theatre in 1985. He was rightly proud of his Paul of Tarsus on stage throughout in The Man of Two Worlds, 1985 at the Westminster Theatre, and he won excellent notices for playing Jay in The Road to the Sea in 2003 at the Orange Tree, Richmond, and in 2012 when he played Scrooge in A Christmas Carol at Reading. He had his biggest successes on television, though, a medium he mastered very quickly. His big break came when he was cast in 1963 as the lead in a 13-part serialisation of Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped. He was still playing this part when cast by John Crockett, who came to see Kidnap being recorded in the Aztecs without having to audition. In 1966, he was drafted into medical soap Emergency Ward 10 to bring a bit of conflict as Dr. Warren Kent, head of a new accident unit. This led to his first brush with the stranger side of TV fame when an emergency situation on the London Tube led to his being asked, due to his being a doctor, to help out. He became even more recognisable thanks to 6 years and over 200 episodes on our screens playing PC and later DC Joe Skinner in the seminal BBC police series Z-Cars. Skinner, introduced in 1969, was dour, sullen and misunderstood, but Cullen imbued him with humanity, even vulnerability, excelling in the series' house style of underplayed, naturalistic performances. He later said that this was the house style and he simply went along with it, but he had very distinct gifts in terms of the social realism aimed for by the show. Viewers were then shocked when, in 1975, Skinner was killed in the line of duty, shot in a downbeat, unsentimental and bittersweet exit, his death the result of him being in the wrong place at the wrong time, befitting this luckless square peg of a character. The episode was also a quality piece of television, a valediction that Cullen's consummate skill and committed performance deserved. After Z-Cars, he cropped up on television regularly, exploiting his native roots as a corrupt councillor, Geordie Watson, in When the Boat Comes In, 1977 to 1981, playing Peter Talbot in Our John Willie, 1980, and Robson Green's father in The Gambling Man, 1995. And he had roles in everything from Blake Seven, 1978, and Sorry, 1981, to Spender, 1991, and Harbour Lights, 2000. In 1997, he was Angus, the head of the Hart clan, the initial focus of Channel 5's first ever soap opera, Family Affairs. His intelligent, nuanced acting and solid professionalism helped to ground a show with a low budget and fast turnaround, but he ultimately fell victim to another shock exit when the Harts were all killed off in an explosion. Still, it was one last stab at TV fame, which he seemed to acquire at regular intervals throughout his impressive career. He also wrote, carving a niche for himself in young people's TV dramas, including episodes of Rogues Rock, 1976, creating and writing Snacker, about a young lad starting out on the Hull trawlers, 1976, and he did 5 episodes of The Paper Lads, set in his native northeast. He also wrote a play for today, Katie, The Year of a Child, about a teenage girl from a family of Irish travellers, and a couple of plays that made up the series The House on the Hill, about a property in Glasgow over the years. He also wrote a number of pantomimes for the stage and had plays produced by Radio 4. His film credits as an actor included Voyage of the Damned, 1976, Dawn of the Dragon Slayer, 2011, and Summer Can Wait, 2018. His voice work included winning a Gold Award for his narration of the feature-length documentary The Destiny of Britain, 2007, and he rekindled his proud association with Doctor Who for the audio adventure series Dark Eyes in 2012, with, of course, Paul McGann. He remained committed to his craft and saw passing on his knowledge and experience as an obligation. He was more than happy to appear in short films for fledgling directors, and he ran the Surrey Heath Youth Actors Company with his wife, and he was a valued and respected teacher and director with a passion for Shakespeare. He voiced the early Shakespeare video project, which has now been rolled out across London schools. At the time of his death, he was planning his next production for Farnham Repertory Theatre, his zeal undimmed. He also served as a Conservative on Surrey Heath Borough Council between 2007 and 2019. A brief 1963 relationship with the actress Kate O'Mara produced a son, Dickon, who died in 2012. He married the actress Yvonne Kenney in 1970, and they had 3 daughters, Emma, Anne-Marie and Adele, and 8 grandchildren. According to Yvonne, Ian's legacy is that he shared his many gifts and talents so generously, and that he inspired generations of fledgling actors. Among his charges at one time was future Cold Feet and Friends star Helen Baxendale. Ian Cullen died on November the 12th, 2019, less than a month after celebrating his 80th birthday. And so ends another episode of Doctor Who. Having spent the opening instalment of the Aztecs establishing the scenario and the key conflicts facing the TARDIS crew, John Lucarotti is able to sit back this week and just let things breathe. The Warriors of Death is chiefly driven by the acting and the dialogue, and it's got great examples of both in spades. Things kick off with a roaring start in the very first scene as the Doctor and Barbara have a spellbinding argument. It's a testament to how well established the relationships between the principal characters have now become that we can be riveted by the fury of their disagreement one minute and yet feel convincingly reassured by the détente they reach moments later. And this is just the first of several opportunities for Jacqueline Hill to shine in this episode, despite what Sydney Newman might have thought. Her war of words with John Ringham's Tlatoxel is a delight, and they thrust and parry with each carefully crafted line of dialogue. But it's her scenes with Keith Pyatt as Ortlog that really shine. The High Priest of Knowledge is at once Barbara's ally and her pawn. He's a victim of her deceit, but also the vehicle by which she hopes to save Aztec society. Her terrible vision of the future, a prophecy to Ortlog, but recorded history to the viewer, makes for haunting television. Yet it's masterfully counterpointed by the blunt way she uses Ortlog as a means to an end, effectively bullying him into ensuring that Tlatoxel does not turn Ian and Ixta's duel into a lethal affair, and unsuccessfully doing so at that. Pragmatism and idealism, an oil and water mix that creates nuanced drama and complex characterization. Lucarotti has plenty of time for the other principal characters too. Beyond that searing opening exchange with Barbara, the Doctor's delightful relationship with Kameka deepens. For a long time, fans tended to dismiss any notion of genuine romance in the Aztecs. These were the days when the Doctor's sexlessness was held up as a virtue, and long before he was snogging Rogue or Madame de Pompadour. But it's hard to deny the evidence of one's eyes, and William Hartnell is obviously communicating what is, at the very least, a deep sense of affection towards the Aztec lady. There's no suggestion of hanky-panky, of course, in the TARDIS, or the Garden of Peace for that matter, but they're getting on a bit, so it's not all ease and whiz once you hit 50. A cup of cocoa and a spot of gardening is as racy as it gets. Ian's exchanges with Ixta about cunning are not only entertaining in their own right, but also foreshadow Ixta's decision to employ his own guile in hoodwinking the Doctor. We may find Ian's special moves a bit nifty for a Picardigan science teacher, but that is because time has protected us from the embedded knowledge that most men of Ian's age, whatever their class or profession, will have seen action in World War II and can probably do things with their hands that we'd rather not think about, and they didn't talk about. Even Susan gets a moment to sparkle. She may only be in one scene, pre-filmed weeks before the rest of the action, but it re-establishes her as an independent-minded young woman. A balm after the Keys of Marinus mostly treated her as a juvenile in perennial need of rescue, and ensures that she remains a small yet important part of the overall narrative. While simply writing the Doctor out of 2 episodes of the Keys of Marinus may have been the most expeditious way to deal with William Hartnell's holiday during the making of that story, the Aztecs demonstrates that finding a way to keep a vacationing regular in the storyline can be a much more satisfying approach. It's interesting to note that Sydney Newman seemed at the time immune to some of this serial's charms, and, in fact, some might say his vaccination against it seems to have created a certain amount of irrationality, Jacqueline Hill not very good indeed. And a total historical of this kind does not quite fit in with our modern-day image of Doctor Who, and yet it's undoubtedly a top-class example of the programme. And it's not like other TV historical dramas of the time, or indeed now, because the very presence of the time travellers themselves gives it a dimension that no other programme can. And that face-off between the Doctor and Barbara, even though it's about a totally abstract and invented concept, the changing of established history, has it all: drama, character, moral ambiguity. And the cliffhanger is a culmination of the manoeuvrings of Totoxel and Barbara, not unlike the lengthy chess game Tigana and the Travellers engaged in Lucarotti's previous story, full of cunning and intelligence. Gorgeous. I don't think we'd sacrifice a moment of it. Oh, and to know your enemy's weakness isn't magic. It's common sense. Doctor Who, The Warriors of Death, featured Keith Pyatt as Ortlock, John Ringham as Totoxel, Ian Cullen as Ixta, Margot van der Berg as Kameka, Walter Randall as Tonila, Andre Boulay as the Perfect Victim, and David Anderson as the Aztec Captain. The title music was by Ron Grainer and the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, the incidental music by Richard Rodney Bennett, the conductor was Marcus Dodds, the story editor was David Whittaker, the designer Barry Newbury, and the associate producer was Mervyn Pinfield. Coming next, Carol Ann Ford is still absent from the studio, but gets the entire episode named after her anyway. That's next time on Doctor Who, Too Much Information. Next episode, The Bride of Sacrifice, or The Pestle with the Poisons in the Bottle from Totoxel, the Cocoa for Kameka is the brew that is true. Well done, Shannon. Too Much Information, The Warriors of Death, was presented by me, Toby Haydoke, from a script I co-wrote, but he wrote that really good bit, with Shannon Patrick Sullivan. Additional voice work came courtesy of Chrissy Bone. With thanks to Richard Bignell, David Brunt, and Graham Kibble-White. Special thanks to the late Ian Cullen and to his daughters Emma and Adele. The series consultant is Richard Bignell, and the music has been specially composed by Wayne Shepherd. There is a supplemental podcast, one per story as opposed to per episode. Far too much information that is now exclusive for patrons, who also qualify for bonus material, early releases, and other exclusives from my archive, or my brain, as well as pictures of my dog. Patrons are also several months ahead with happy times and places, so if you want to hear Doctors producer Simon Curtis talking about colony and space, or Agatha Christie expert Mark Aldridge expounding upon The Ark, two underrated stories that have been an absolute joy to revisit, and the patrons have enjoyed revisiting and reevaluating them too, then head over there, patreon.com/Toby Haydock. References. Too much information would, of course, contain far too little information if it weren't for the wealth of original scripts and production paperwork that has been unearthed and collected over the years. My debt to those intrepid high priests of knowledge who were responsible for this Herculean effort is beyond description. I have access to Verity Lambert's scrapbooks, which were kindly scanned and relayed to me by a very generous benefactor. You know who you are. These contain many newspaper reports that might not be available, for example, online or anywhere close to hand. And bits and bobs relating to the Aztecs are also dotted about a miscellany of early years paperwork in the BBC Written Archive. The production subtitles on BBC Video's DVD of the Aztecs, written by Matthew Kilburn, are a treasure trove of insight and information. Newly available from Telos Publishing is the Doctor Who Production Diary Volume 1, The Hartnell Years by David Brunt, the deepest dive ever undertaken into the surviving documentation that depicts the making of Doctor Who. This gold mine of day-to-day detail will let you feel as though you're sitting in an office in 1964, peering over the shoulders of Verity Lambert and David Whittaker. The Doctor Who Production Diary is the latest addition to a small library of splendid reference works that chronicle the earliest days of Doctor Who. They span Jeremy Bentham's pioneering Doctor Who The Early Years, to the titanic tag team of Doctor Who The 60s and Doctor Who The Handbook, The First Doctor, by David J. Howe, Mark Stammers and Stephen James Walker, to the indispensable Doctor Who The Complete History, Volume 2, part of the Complete History series edited by John Ainsworth and Mark Wright. It boasts contributions from Jonathan Morris, Richard Atkinson and Alistair McGowan, and of course it builds upon the archives published in Doctor Who magazine and written by Andrew Pixley. The archive for the Aztecs can be found in issue 266, with updates in the 7th instalment of the Doctor Who magazine special edition. Also a vital resource in the pages of Doctor Who magazine is the Fact of Fiction, for which Alan Barnes studied the Aztecs in great detail in issue 516. And a discussion of relevant periodicals cannot end without an acknowledgement to that premier magazine of Doctor Who research, Richard Bignell's Nothing at the End of the Lane. Occupying its corner of the World Wide Web for 29 years and counting is Doctor Who, A Brief History of Time, open brackets, travel, close brackets. There, Shannon Patrick Sullivan provides another account of the making of the Aztecs, although this one is more, well, brief, as it says on the tin. I walk in the shadows of giants. Giants who look around at their giant friends hurling massive boulders and tossing lightning bolts, and do their bit by lobbing a cunningly researched piece of trivia instead. I'm indebted to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Michael Harvey, Dave Hoskin, Richie Howarth, Robert Jewell, Paul Jones, Andrew Jordan, Andrew Jolly, Christopher Joyce, Jess Jerkovic, Rick King-Byatt, Andy Kitching, Ashley Knight, Clive Lewis, James Lark, Lisa and Andrew, Gavin McLean, Steve Manfred, David Matthewman, Jason Mayo, Rossa McPhillips, Stuart Mitchell, Nathan Moore, Ian Morgan, Matthew Newton, Graham Knott, Dave Owen, Adam Parkin, Ken Patterson, Melvin Pena, Jonathan Potter, Kevin Parker, Scott Pride, Dylan Rees, John Rivers, Jim Sangster, Keith Say, Graham Slight, David Shepherdson, Stephen, Neil Tate, Nick Temple, Damien Timmer, Sabrina Tirabassi, Apollo C. Vermuth, Gary Wales, Adam Westwood, Stephen White, Tom White, Michael Williams, Rhys Williams, Andrew Willis, Andrew Wilson, David James Wilson and Sydney Wilson. You can join their number at patreon.com/Toby Haydock. Patreon's great, actually, and there's loads there on my Patreon. 3 releases a week, usually, not including the pictures of my dog. They're a bonus. But there are advanced releases. There are little delvings into my archive, either paperwork that has been left to me or interviews that I've not released or only released in edited form, as well as behind-the-scenes looks at the DVD and Blu-ray stuff that I do. And, of course, these podcasts. 6 months in advance I'm trying to aim for Happy Times and Places, and certainly a month or 2 for Too Much Information and for Indefinable Magic, my other more whimsical attempt to chronicle Doctor Who in as many different ways as possible. It's also a nice community there where the positivity is encouraged, and lots of people come, and build upon some musings of mine with their own bits of information that they've done and their own positive contributions, and it's rather jolly. So worth hanging out there. £3 a month is the lowest tier. It can go up as high as you like, really, but everything is available at that lowest paying tier. There's also a free tier, but I haven't quite worked out what to do with that yet. I have been bugging the odd thing out for free, but I need to get down and dirty with exactly what Patreon is doing with these constant updates that an old man is finding very difficult to keep up with. But it's working fine. I just probably haven't joined 2025 yet. I'm still a bit like the Audacity I'm recording with. I'm used to the older version, and that's what I'm sticking with. I'm all over social media at Haydoke Podcasts and at Toby Haydoke on Twitter. But if Twitter is too evil, I'm also on Blue Sky. Oh, I'm an appeaser. I'm also on Instagram at toby.haydoke, and I have a Facebook page. I'm everywhere except for TikTok and OnlyFans, but it's only a matter of time. Thanks for listening, and please do spread the word about these. It's easy to take things for granted, and I've certainly slackened on various social media and pluggings of these, and it's very easy to plateau or stagnate. So if you like these, please spread the word. Please tweet about them. Please do all that you can, because they do take an awful lot of time, and I try to do them as well as possible. And so, yeah, I mean, spreading the word, particularly about these ones, too much information, because a lot of work goes into them, and I think they're good. I think they're, dare I say it, Rethian. Dare I say it even more, perhaps too Rethian for the current incarnation of the BBC. I have pitched something along these lines, not as detailed as this, but something with the same ambition to be sort of educational, informative, interesting, and lightly fun. And they didn't want to know. So I'm doing it myself. But that means I need your help.